Sometimes the most expensive thing a person can lose isn't a job. It's the chance to walk away from someone who needs them. At exactly 8:12 on a cool Tuesday morning, Michael Carter stood outside the loading dock of Hawthorne Logistics with a paper coffee in one hand and his lunchbox in the other, unaware that before the hour ended, his paycheck, his reputation, and the fragile security he had spent 8 years building for his little daughter would all disappear. The autumn air carried the scent of wet pavement after an early drizzle, while delivery trucks rumbled into their bays and employees hurried through the security gates with their eyes fixed on schedules, phones, and deadlines. Michael moved more slowly than the others. He always did. Life had taught him that rushing rarely solved anything. Since losing his wife 4 years earlier, every morning had become a carefully balanced routine built around one promise. No matter how difficult life became, 8-year-old Lily would never feel abandoned again. Before leaving home, he had braided her blonde hair the best he could, packed her peanut butter sandwich into a small lunchbox decorated with faded cartoon stars, kissed her forehead, and whispered the same words he had spoken every school day. "Be kind today, sweetheart. Kindness always comes home." She had smiled through missing front teeth and waved from the school entrance as though her father were the strongest man in America, instead of an exhausted maintenance technician earning barely enough to cover rent. Michael carried that smile with him every mile to work. It was worth more than every dollar in his checking account. As he approached the employee entrance, voices suddenly erupted across the parking lot. A young woman, visibly pregnant, had collapsed beside a silver SUV near the visitor spaces. Her purse lay tipped over, papers scattered across the damp asphalt as she struggled to steady herself against the vehicle. People noticed. Heads turned. Phones appeared. A few whispered. Someone muttered that security would handle it. Another complained they would be late if they stopped. The security guard glanced toward the front office instead of walking over. Michael looked toward the time clock mounted inside the glass entrance, only 50 feet away. Clock in now, and maybe no one would question his attendance. Walk away, and he would keep the health insurance Lily depended on. Help the stranger, and he already knew exactly how his supervisor would react. His phone vibrated. Lily's school had sent a cheerful reminder about the father-daughter breakfast scheduled for Friday morning. Michael stared at the message for only a heartbeat before slipping the phone back into his pocket. Then he quietly placed his lunchbox on the curb, set down his untouched coffee, and walked toward the woman without hesitation. He knelt beside her, his voice calm despite the growing crowd. "Ma'am, you're not alone. We're going to get you through this." She looked into his tired blue eyes, trying to speak through shallow breaths, but only one frightened whisper escaped her lips. Michael never asked her name. He never asked who she was. And as the factory doors closed behind him for what would unknowingly become the last time, neither of them realized that this single moment of quiet compassion was about to rewrite both of their lives forever. Michael eased one arm behind the woman's shoulders while another employee finally called for medical assistance. But precious seconds had already slipped away beneath a cloud of hesitation and excuses. Her breathing gradually steadied as he spoke with the same calm voice he had once used to comfort Lily after nightmares. "You're doing fine. Just keep breathing. Help is coming." She nodded weakly, gripping his sleeve for balance before quietly letting go, almost embarrassed that a complete stranger had shown her more concern than dozens of people standing only a few yards away. Within minutes, the ambulance arrived, its flashing lights reflecting across the rain-soaked parking lot while paramedics carefully helped her onto a stretcher. Before the doors closed, she searched the crowd until she found Michael once more. Their eyes met for only a second. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice barely audible over the morning traffic. Then the ambulance disappeared around the corner. Michael stood still for another moment, picked up his now cold coffee from the curb, and finally walked toward the employee entrance. He already knew what waited inside. The warehouse floor buzzed with forklifts, conveyor belts, and scanners, but the familiar sounds felt strangely distant as his supervisor, Carl Benson, folded his arms near the time clock. "Nice of you to finally show up," he said loudly enough for nearby workers to hear. Michael glanced at the clock. He was 22 minutes late. Someone needed help outside. Carl laughed without humor. You are paid to maintain this building, not play hero in the parking lot. Several co-workers lowered their eyes. A few exchanged uncomfortable looks, yet nobody spoke. Michael answered quietly. If it had been your wife or daughter lying there, I hope someone would have stopped. The words hung in the air like the last note of an old song. Carl's expression hardened. Turn your badge. No warning. No discussion. No second chance. Michael slowly unclipped the faded identification card that had hung around his neck for nearly a decade and placed it into Carl's waiting hand. Around him, machines continued moving, boxes continued rolling, and schedules continued marching forward as though nothing important had happened. Yet to Michael, it felt as if the ground beneath his boots had shifted. He emptied his locker into a worn canvas backpack, carefully folded the family photograph taped inside the locker door, and slipped it into his wallet. It showed him, Lily, and his late wife Emily during one bright summer afternoon at Lake Michigan before illness had quietly changed everything. Emily had often told him that character was measured by what a person chose when nobody promised a reward. Remembering her voice now, somehow, made the weight in his chest easier to carry. Outside, gray clouds drifted slowly across the October sky as Michael climbed into his aging blue pickup truck. The fuel gauge rested just above empty, and the check engine light had become such a familiar companion that he barely noticed it anymore. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Lily. "Hi, Daddy," she said with cheerful excitement. "Do not forget Friday breakfast at school. You promised." Michael closed his eyes for a brief moment before smiling into the phone. "I remember, sweetheart. I always keep my promises." He started the engine, not knowing how he would pay next month's rent, but knowing with absolute certainty that if tomorrow presented the same choice again, he would still walk across that parking lot without hesitation. The next morning arrived with a quiet that felt heavier than the rain clouds drifting above the small Ohio town. Michael woke before sunrise, just as he always had, although there was nowhere he needed to report by 7 o'clock anymore. Habit was difficult to erase, especially after years of building a life around responsibility instead of comfort. He stood in the kitchen flipping pancakes, while Lily sat at the table, finishing a drawing for school. She looked up with the innocent confidence only a child could carry. "Are you going to work later?" she asked. Michael smiled gently as he slid another pancake onto her plate. "Not today. I have something even more important to do." She tilted her head. "Find a new job?" He nodded. That is exactly the plan. He never allowed fear to become part of her breakfast. After dropping Lily off at school, Michael drove across town visiting repair shops, warehouses, apartment maintenance offices, and construction suppliers. At every stop, he shook hands, filled out applications, and thanked managers even when they politely explained they were not hiring. By late afternoon, a stack of folded applications rested on the passenger seat beside him while the fuel gauge dropped lower with every mile. His wallet contained less than $60. Still, he refused to let disappointment settle into bitterness. Emily had once told him that hope was a discipline, not a feeling, and he carried those words like a compass. Meanwhile, several miles away inside the private maternity wing of St. Catherine Medical Center, the woman he had helped slowly opened her eyes to the soft glow of afternoon sunlight filtering through oversized windows. Fresh flowers lined the room. Security officers waited discreetly outside, and expensive medical equipment hummed almost silently in the background. She rested one hand gently across her stomach before turning toward her longtime assistant, Rebecca Collins. "Did they find him?" she asked quietly. Rebecca lowered a tablet onto the bedside table. "Not yet. The witnesses only remember that he was wearing a blue work jacket. The ambulance report lists him as an unidentified bystander." The woman looked toward the window, disappointment replacing relief. "He lost something because of me." Rebecca hesitated. "How do you know?" Her voice became almost a whisper. "Because when they closed the ambulance doors, I saw the security supervisor pointing toward him. He was supposed to be at work." Rebecca studied her employer carefully. Very few people ever saw Victoria Sterling without perfect composure. Today was different. Behind the calm confidence of one of the youngest billionaire chief executive officers in the country was a grateful woman wondering whether a stranger had paid too high a price for doing the right thing. She closed her eyes for a moment before speaking again. I want every security recording from Hawthorne Logistics. Every camera. Every angle. Find him. Rebecca nodded. I will have investigators start immediately. Victoria slowly smiled, though concern still lingered behind her gray eyes. Do not find him because he helped a billionaire. Find him because he helped someone he believed was completely ordinary. At that very moment, unaware that one of the most powerful women in America had begun searching for him, Michael parked beneath a fading help wanted sign outside Sterling Technologies. He had never heard much about the company except that it offered stable jobs and treated employees well. He straightened his only pressed shirt in the truck mirror, picked up his resume, and quietly walked toward the glass entrance, believing he was simply applying for another chance to provide for his daughter while destiny waited just beyond the revolving doors. The polished lobby of Sterling Technologies reflected the afternoon sunlight across marble floors, so spotless they almost looked like still water. Employees moved with quiet confidence between glass offices, carrying tablets, coffee cups, and conversations about product launches and quarterly forecasts. Michael Carter paused just inside the revolving door, suddenly aware that his worn leather shoes and inexpensive jacket seemed out of place among tailored suits and polished confidence. He tightened his grip on the folder containing his resume, took one slow breath, and reminded himself that dignity never depended on the price of a person's clothes. At the reception desk, a smiling woman greeted him warmly. Good afternoon. How may I help you? Michael returned the smile. I saw the maintenance technician position online. I was hoping to submit my application in person. She nodded politely. Absolutely. Please have a seat. Human Resources will be with you shortly. Michael thanked her and settled into a chair overlooking the city skyline. Nearby, several employees chatted quietly, while a large digital display highlighted Sterling Technologies' commitment to family support, community outreach, and employee wellness. Michael found himself thinking that Emily would have liked a company that spoke so openly about kindness instead of competition. Several floors above, Victoria Sterling stepped out of a private conference room after reviewing medical updates with her physician. Although her pregnancy required her to reduce travel, she insisted on returning to work earlier than anyone recommended. She believed leadership was not something practiced only during easy seasons of life. Rebecca Collins approached carrying a tablet. The investigators finally located the security footage from Hawthorne Logistics. Victoria immediately stopped walking. Did they find him? Rebecca touched the screen, opening a paused video from the parking lot. Victoria watched as the recording showed dozens of employees walking past without stopping. Then one man quietly placed his lunchbox on the sidewalk and hurried toward her without hesitation. She leaned closer. Freeze the frame. Rebecca complied. Victoria's eyes softened. That is him. Another recording appeared moments later, showing Michael entering the warehouse before speaking calmly to his supervisor. There was no shouting from his side, no anger, only quiet conviction. Finally, the video captured him handing over his employee badge before leaving with nothing more than a backpack and a small family photograph. Victoria lowered her eyes. He really lost his job. Rebecca nodded gently. Our investigators confirmed it. His name is Michael Carter. Widower. One daughter. Former maintenance technician. Silence settled across the executive hallway. The distant hum of elevators and quiet conversations faded into the background. Victoria stared through the glass wall, overlooking the city below. He never asked for my name. Rebecca smiled faintly. Most people would have searched the internet before the ambulance reached the hospital. Victoria answered softly, that is exactly why he matters. Before Rebecca could respond, another notification appeared on her tablet. There is something else. Victoria looked up. What is it? Rebecca smiled for the first time that afternoon. Michael Carter is downstairs right now. Victoria blinked in surprise. Downstairs. He is applying for the open maintenance position. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Victoria looked once more at the paused security image of the quiet man, kneeling beside a stranger he believed had nothing to offer him in return. A gentle smile touched her face, carrying equal parts gratitude and admiration. "Do not tell anyone who he is," she said calmly. "Not yet. I want to meet the man who chose compassion before opportunity, without knowing that destiny had already begun walking beside him." The Human Resources office overlooked the downtown skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the soft golden light of late afternoon. Michael sat quietly in a leather chair with his resume resting neatly on his lap, resisting the temptation to glance repeatedly at the expensive watches, designer briefcases, and polished shoes of the other applicants waiting nearby. He reminded himself that confidence was not something a paycheck could buy. Across the building, Victoria Sterling entered a private observation room connected to the executive conference suite. One entire wall had been replaced by discreet, smart glass that overlooked the reception area below without revealing anyone watching from inside. Rebecca Collins dimmed the display before quietly stepping aside. Victoria's eyes immediately found Michael sitting alone, patiently waiting his turn while everyone else scrolled through phones or rehearsed polished interview answers under their breath. He simply watched the city through the glass with the calm expression of someone who had already survived harder days than this one. "He looks exactly the same," Victoria whispered. Rebecca smiled gently. "Most people change when they think opportunity is watching." Victoria slowly shook her head. "He is not performing for anyone." Downstairs, another applicant accidentally dropped a folder filled with certificates across the polished floor. Papers scattered in every direction, sliding beneath chairs and tables. Several people looked over before returning to their phones. Without saying a word, Michael stood, gathered each page carefully, organized them into their original order, and handed the folder back with a warm smile. "Good luck today," he said simply. The younger man looked embarrassed. "Thank you." Most people would have ignored that. Michael shrugged lightly. Everyone needs a hand once in a while. Upstairs, Victoria watched the exchange in complete silence. Rebecca glanced toward her. "He does not know anyone is watching. That is why every decision matters," Victoria answered softly. Moments later, Human Resources Manager Daniel Brooks entered the waiting area carrying a tablet. "Mr. Michael Carter?" Michael stood immediately. "That is me." Daniel shook his hand. "Thank you for coming in. Please follow me." The interview room was modest but bright, decorated with photographs of employee volunteer projects, community gardens, and family events sponsored by the company. Daniel reviewed the resume carefully. "You have solid maintenance experience. 8 years at Hawthorne Logistics. Why did you leave?" Michael hesitated only briefly. "I was terminated." Daniel looked up. "May I ask why?" Michael could have spoken bitterly. He could have blamed his supervisor, criticized the company, or described the unfairness that still lingered in his mind. Instead, he answered with complete honesty. "Someone needed immediate help outside the building. I chose to help first. My employer disagreed with that decision." Daniel studied him for several quiet seconds. "Would you make the same choice again?" Michael smiled, not proudly, but peacefully. If another person believed they were alone, yes. Every single time. The room fell silent. Daniel slowly closed the resume. There was no dramatic speech, no attempt to impress, only a simple answer that sounded too ordinary to change anyone's life. Yet upstairs, Victoria Sterling felt something shift deep inside her heart. She had spent years meeting executives who could negotiate billion-dollar contracts, investors who could predict markets, and consultants who knew exactly what people wanted to hear. But the quiet widower, sitting one floor below, had just answered the most important question without realizing he had been taking the real interview all along. Daniel Brooks thanked Michael for his time and asked him to wait in the reception area while the hiring committee completed its review. Michael nodded with his usual quiet courtesy and walked back toward the lobby, unaware that every step he took was still being watched from the executive floor above. He sat near the tall windows once again, folded his hands, and gazed at the skyline where the late afternoon sun painted the glass towers with soft shades of gold. His phone vibrated gently. It was a message from Lily. She had taken a picture of the drawing she finished in school. It showed a little girl holding her father's hand beneath a bright blue sky. Across the top, she had written in uneven handwriting, "My dad always helps people." Michael smiled, his eyes lingering on the picture longer than he realized. Upstairs, the executive hiring committee gathered around a polished walnut conference table. Financial reports, hiring summaries, and candidate profiles filled the digital screens surrounding the room. Daniel presented the finalists before pausing on Michael Carter's file. Strong maintenance background, he explained. Dependable work history until his recent termination. Before he could continue, Chief Operations Officer Richard Ellison leaned back in his chair. Terminated employees are always a risk, he said, especially someone dismissed for abandoning his workstation. Another executive nodded. Our insurance carriers expect reliability. Compassion is admirable, but procedures exist for a reason. A third executive added, there are applicants with cleaner employment records and technical certifications. Why should we take unnecessary chances? Victoria remained silent. She listened without interrupting, her hands resting calmly on the conference table. She wanted every opinion spoken aloud before she answered. Richard continued confidently. If we hire him, we send a message that breaking protocol has no consequences. Several executives quietly agreed. The room settled into comfortable certainty. Then Victoria finally looked up. Is everyone finished? The conversation stopped immediately. She reached for the remote resting beside her chair and pressed a single button. The large presentation screen went dark before displaying security footage from the Hawthorne Logistics parking lot. The executives watched dozens of employees walk past the pregnant woman without stopping. Then Michael appeared, setting down his lunchbox before running toward her without hesitation. Nobody spoke. Victoria allowed the recording to continue. The second video showed Michael calmly surrendering his employee badge after explaining why he had chosen to help. There were no raised voices from him. No anger. No attempt to defend himself. Only quiet dignity. The conference room grew still. Even the gentle hum of the ventilation system seemed louder than anyone breathing. Victoria paused the image on Michael kneeling beside the woman. Do you know who she is? She asked softly. Richard frowned. A customer? Victoria slowly shook her head. No. She looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes before speaking again. She is me. Silence settled over the room with a weight that no presentation slide could ever create. No one reached for a tablet. No one whispered another opinion. Victoria continued with the same calm voice. This man did not know my name. He did not know my position. He did not know I owned this company. He believed I was simply another frightened mother who needed help, and he accepted losing everything without asking for anything in return. She gently closed Michael's file and folded her hands. If Sterling Technologies cannot recognize that kind of character, then we are not failing to hire the right employee. We are failing to remember who we claim to be. For several long seconds, no one in the executive conference room spoke. The polished table that had witnessed countless negotiations worth billions of dollars now held something far more valuable than numbers. It held the quiet weight of truth. Richard Ellison lowered his eyes to the paused image on the screen, where Michael Carter knelt beside a woman he believed was an ordinary stranger. The confidence that had filled his earlier arguments dissolved into thoughtful silence. Victoria Sterling rose slowly from her chair, one hand resting naturally against the side of the table. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the conference room, bathing the walls in warm amber tones that softened every sharp edge in the room. Character, she said gently, is not measured by how people behave when opportunity is watching. It is measured by what they choose when no reward seems possible. No one challenged her. No one could. She turned toward Daniel Brooks. Offer Michael Carter the position. Daniel nodded. Effective immediately? Victoria smiled softly. No. The room looked at her with quiet curiosity. Offer him something better than the position he applied for. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Richard carefully cleared his throat. Based on one good deed, Victoria met his eyes without a trace of anger. based on years of becoming the kind of man who would make that choice without hesitation. She continued calmly. Technical skills can be taught. Integrity cannot. Another executive slowly closed his tablet. I understand now. Victoria nodded appreciatively before adding one final instruction. And begin a complete review of Hawthorne Logistics. Daniel looked up. Their employment practices? Everything connected to Mr. Carter's termination, Victoria replied. If he was dismissed for helping another human being during a medical emergency, then the truth deserves daylight. While legal advisors quietly began making calls, Michael remained downstairs completely unaware of the conversation unfolding above him. He sat patiently beside the window, reading a children's library book he had borrowed earlier that morning while waiting for Lily after school. It was a story about ordinary people performing quiet acts of kindness. He smiled as he reached the final page. Moments later, Daniel Brooks approached the reception area carrying a simple folder instead of the formal rejection letters many applicants expected after long interviews. Mr. Carter? Michael immediately stood. Yes, sir. Daniel extended his hand warmly. Would you mind coming with me once more? Michael followed him through a different hallway than before, passing photographs of employees volunteering at food banks, rebuilding playgrounds, and mentoring local students. He noticed every picture. He quietly admired the smiles more than the buildings. Finally, Daniel opened a conference room door. Victoria Sterling stood near the window, dressed in a simple navy maternity dress beneath a tailored blazer, looking more approachable than powerful. The moment Michael saw her face, recognition slowly appeared in his eyes. You, he whispered almost to himself. Victoria smiled with quiet gratitude. Yes, we finally meet properly. Michael looked genuinely relieved instead of impressed. I'm so glad you're doing well. He did not ask whether she was wealthy. He did not ask why she was there. He did not even ask how she found him. His very first concern was simply her health. Victoria felt her heart grow unexpectedly lighter. She had spent years surrounded by people fascinated by her success. Yet standing before her was a man who remembered only the frightened mother he had helped in a parking lot. And in that peaceful moment, before another word was spoken, she realized that respect had quietly arrived long before either of them would ever dare to call it something more. Michael stood quietly for a moment, trying to reconcile the memory of the frightened woman in the parking lot with the calm executive standing before him. Victoria noticed the uncertainty in his eyes and offered a gentle smile that carried none of the distance people often associated with wealth or power. Please, she said softly, sit down. They took seats across a small conference table instead of at opposite ends of a long executive table that dominated the room. It felt less like a business meeting and more like two people finally finishing a conversation that fate had interrupted days earlier. Victoria folded her hands. I owe you an apology. Michael looked surprised. You do not owe me anything. She shook her head. Because of me, you lost your job. Michael answered with the same peaceful honesty that had guided every difficult choice in his life. No, I lost a job because someone made a decision. Helping you is never the mistake. His words settled gently into the quiet room. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city continued moving beneath the fading evening sun while inside, time itself seemed to slow. Victoria had negotiated with presidents, investors, and global partners, yet no conversation had ever felt this sincere. Daniel Brooks quietly placed an envelope on the table before excusing himself. After the door closed, Victoria slid it toward Michael. This is an offer to become facilities operations supervisor. It includes full benefits, flexible hours for your daughter, and a salary well above your previous position. Michael looked at the envelope, but did not reach for it immediately. That is generous, he said carefully, but I hope this is because you believe I can do the work. Victoria smiled, her gray eyes reflecting quiet admiration. It is because I believe you already have. Only then did Michael open the envelope. He read each page slowly, paying attention not only to the salary, but to the family leave policy, health coverage, and employee volunteer program. When he finished, he looked up. Thank you, Victoria Nadif. There is one more thing. She explained that Sterling Technologies sponsored community projects, children's education programs, and emergency assistance for struggling families. I would like you to help lead those efforts when you are ready. You understand people in ways that cannot be taught. Michael lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. If I can help families stay together, I would be honored. The following Saturday, Victoria accepted an invitation that surprised even herself. She visited the neighborhood park where Michael spent every weekend with Lily. There were no cameras, no security entourage surrounding every step, only Rebecca waiting discreetly nearby at Victoria's request. Lily raced across the playground before stopping beside her father. "Daddy, is it your friend from the hospital?" Michael smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. This is Victoria." Lily walked over with the fearless honesty that belonged only to children. "I'm glad you are feeling better." Victoria knelt carefully so they could speak at eye level. "Thank you. Your father helped me when I needed it most." Lily grinned proudly. "He always helps people. He says kindness is free, so nobody is too poor to give it away." Victoria felt unexpected emotion rise behind her eyes. She glanced toward Michael, who looked slightly embarrassed by his daughter's simple wisdom. In boardrooms, people admired her success. At charity galas, they praised her generosity. But standing beneath the golden autumn trees, listening to a little girl describe her father with uncomplicated love, Victoria realized that the richest life was not measured by what a person owned. It was measured by the quiet example they left in the hearts of those who trusted them most. 1 year later, the first light of spring stretched across the streets of Columbus, Ohio, painting quiet neighborhoods with the soft promise of another ordinary morning. Michael Carter stood outside Maple Grove Elementary School holding 2 small lunchboxes while Lily adjusted the backpack on her shoulders with a confidence that had grown steadily over the past year. Life no longer felt like a daily battle against uncertainty. Sterling Technologies had become more than an employer. It had become a place where Michael helped rebuild community centers, organize emergency repair teams for struggling families, and quietly reminded every employee that service was never beneath leadership. Yet despite the promotions, the recognition, and the comfortable home he could now provide for Lily, very little about him had changed. He still drove the same blue pickup truck, although it finally ran without the check engine light. He still greeted every custodian by name before entering the office. He still believed that the smallest acts of kindness were often the ones remembered longest. Behind him, another car pulled gently to the curb. Victoria Sterling stepped out with a warm smile, one hand holding the tiny fingers of her baby son while the other balanced a diaper bag across her shoulder. The powerful chief executive officer who once filled headlines with billion-dollar business decisions now looked happiest carrying a sleepy little boy through the cool morning air. Lily saw her first and ran forward with a bright smile. "Good morning, Victoria." Victoria laughed softly before kneeling to hug her. "Good morning, sweetheart." The little boy reached toward Michael, who carefully lifted him into his arms with the same calm confidence that had first brought them together in a rain-soaked parking lot many months earlier. The child giggled, wrapping tiny hands around Michael's finger while Victoria watched quietly. There are moments in life that no amount of success could purchase. This was one of them. The school bell rang across the playground as children hurried toward their classrooms. Lily paused before entering the building, turning back toward the 3 people waiting beside the sidewalk. She smiled the way only children could smile when they believed the world was exactly as it should be. "See you this afternoon," she called. "Love you." "Love you too," Michael answered. Victoria echoed the same words, and Lily disappeared through the front doors carrying both voices with her. For a while, none of them moved. The gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and flowering trees while birds welcomed another ordinary day that had quietly become extraordinary. Victoria looked toward Michael. "Do you ever think about that morning?" she asked softly. Michael smiled. "Sometimes. Do you wish you had made a different choice?" He looked down at the little boy resting peacefully in his arms before lifting his eyes to meet hers. "Not for a single second." Victoria reached over and gently took his hand. No photographers captured the moment. No reporters announced it. There were no speeches, no applause, and no audience waiting to celebrate. Only quiet gratitude, quiet respect, and a family that had been built one simple act of kindness at a time. The world would always remember Victoria Sterling as the billionaire who led one of America's most successful companies. But in one little girl's heart, and in one little boy's future, the greatest title belonged to a man who once believed he had lost everything because he stopped to help a stranger, only to discover that grace has a remarkable way of finding those who choose compassion before convenience, dignity before recognition, and love before reward.